Welcome to lesson 3 here out of the book of Thessalonians. We are studying throughout this book and dealing with the subject of steadfast as an overall theme. And the third lesson is titled The Weight of a Witness. Now, we've gotten through chapter number 1, and in there, Paul was celebrating what God had done in the lives of the Thessalonian believers. But as we get into chapter number 2, which is where we're going to start today, he begins reminding them how the gospel had first come to them. They had dealt with that opposition. Again, we focused on that with the background. And there's a lot of problems that Paul faced. And as people were there, some of what they were trying to do was discredit his ministry. And rather than Paul defending himself for personal reasons, it wasn't just him defending for the sake of trying to, because he cared what people thought per se. The point was, his character and the ministry that he had needed to be defended because he needed to have integrity in his life. He was preaching a message, and you cannot separate the message from the messenger. And so the so what, if you would say, for the lesson that we're going to have is very much for us as believers to recognize that even though we have an awesome message, we have a responsibility to be the right kind of a messenger. And primarily, we're going to deal with credibility. So the Thessalonians had heard Paul's preaching, but they were also watching his conduct. They saw his way of living. They saw how he was responding under pressure. They saw how he handled things like opposition. And ultimately, they saw that he stayed motivated for the right reasons. Again, I brought up the idea of not being worried about what other people thought. He cared greatly about what God thought, and we'll see that here in this lesson. So as believers, we need to have a testimony that adds credibility to the message that we proclaim. So in these verses, what we're going to see is we're going to see 6 different qualities or characteristics that really give weight to a witness. And so this is all out of 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 through 6. I'll read it to you. Some of these lessons, I haven't added this into the video, but again, some of you prefer listening versus the reading through everything here. So it says this, starting verse 1, "For yourselves, brethren, know our entrance in unto you, that it was not in vain, but even after that we had suffered before, and were shamefully entreated, as ye know at Philippi, we were bold in our God to speak unto you the gospel of God with much contention. For exhortation was not of deceit, nor of uncleanness, nor of guile, but as we were allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak not as pleasing men, but God, which trieth our hearts. For neither at any time used we flattering words, as ye know, nor a cloak of covetousness, God is witness. Nor of men sought we glory, neither of you, nor yet of others, when we might have been burdensome as the apostles of Christ." So again, what we're going to do is this. We're going to break down, and I pull out 6 different characteristics that we see in Paul's life that gave him credibility as the messenger. So the assumption is this: we are supposed to be witnesses. If we're saved, we're believers, we ought to tell what we know. We ought to communicate the message we've been entrusted with. And we've been entrusted to preach the gospel. And so that's the given of the message. It's not really all about the need to go and preach the gospel. That should be what we are doing. Just like we covered on how the gospel changes lives. That should be a massive change in our life, that once we're saved, we are telling other people about how Christ changed our life. So these characteristics are things we can take and make sure they're implemented in our life, because it gives credibility to our testimony, and then ultimately then to the message that we preach. So the first one is this: the weight of a witness is seen in fruitfulness. So in verse number 1, he deals with the idea of, our entrance in unto you. It was not in vain. When Paul deals with this, he's talking about the fact that his ministry was producing results, real results. So he's there in a short time, and people got saved because he's preaching the gospel. He's a great witness, and he says this: it's not in vain. So as he's making this beginning argument, he's not saying, hey, I'm an apostle, that I'm respected by all these people. He's not pushing his agenda. He's not even capitalizing on the different ministries that he had or his own reputation. Instead, what he's doing is this: he's saying, look at your life. The gospel changed you. I just wrote to you about it. The gospel has changed you. And what he's saying is this: when it's not in vain, it means it wasn't empty. It wasn't ineffective. When he came through that town and he preached the gospel, he was showing there's fruit, and there's fruit that remains. And so his preaching had a purpose, and it also produced results. But then notice this, how could Paul know that his preaching was not in vain? It was because of these people that he wanted to write this letter to. They were the evidence. They were that living proof. And so Paul was pointing to the fact that they had changed lives. We've already covered it, but they turned from idols. They had received the gospel. Obviously, they received the gospel first. They turned from their idols. They endured the persecution. They developed a testimony that was sounded out through the region. And so ultimately, here's what Paul's saying. I can look back at that town and know God was working there. God did that. And so Jesus, he was the same way. He taught this, that we ought to have visible fruit, that we ought to bear fruit. John 15:8 says, herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. That idea of bear much fruit means it's displayed, it's showed, not for man's glory, but for God's glory. He says, so shall ye be my disciples. So as Jesus speaks about that visible, recognizable fruit, it's showing you that if you were to look at a tree, and I could look out the window and look, and again, I don't have fruit trees right here, but the idea is this, just like spiritual fruit doesn't save a person, it reveals that God's working in their life. Same idea, you look out and if you see fruit on a tree, you say, that tree's alive, it's thriving, it's well, it's healthy. Same idea in a believer's life. When you see fruit in our life as a believer, you look and go, there's credibility there because there's life. And one of the major dangers, and again, this is the application per se of this point, but the major dangers of modern Christianity is that we get content with things like activity or busyness, and we're not letting actual transformation take place. That's why the last lesson was so important, is because we see that the gospel was at work when we got saved, but it needs to stay in work, and it needs to continue working on us. And the credibility of our life and the credibility of our message is the fact that we can have fruit in our life. And when people see that, they say, okay, that's healthy. So as a healthy church, we should be producing changed lives. It should be that you could go around our church and you should see testimonies of people's lives being changed because there's growth taking place. In our Sunday school classes, we should have spiritual growth. When you're teaching and you're ministering to the people in your class, think through what's their next step in spiritual growth. Do you have anybody that's saved but not baptized yet? Do you have people that, they've been saved a while, but they've not gotten into serving in different capacities? Maybe somebody's just struggling in certain areas, and it's certain teaching truths that they need to have fruit in it. We should have fruit in our life. There was fruitfulness in Paul's. The next one is this. There's the weight of a witness is seen in boldness. So that's out of verse number 2. And again, he had already suffered. He'd gone through all that he went through in Philippi, now in Thessalonica. And Acts 16 gives you all of that. So we've seen the history of it. I don't need to go more into it here in the video. But again, you could bring it up again if you feel like it's appropriate for your class. Make sure they understand it. Maybe people that haven't caught some of the first couple lessons. And here's what it is. Most people, when they get under pressure like that, when they feel that type of persecution or pressure, most people just go silent. It's like, I don't want to deal with the pressure. I don't want to create problems. But Paul, he continued preaching. And so notice what he says. He says, we were bold in our God. This boldness came from God. Proverbs 28, verse 1. The end of it is really the focus, but it says, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. It says, but the righteous are bold as a lion. So when Paul gets into this, he deals with, the phrase with much contention. He's preaching there and there's much contention. There's conflict going on. There's struggles taking place. He is facing opposition. It wasn't like he's in the city and everybody's cheering him on like, thank you for bringing the gospel. They were against him. Yet he chose to obey God rather than men. And so the truth becomes more convincing when people see that you're willing to suffer for it. I think of it this way. Sometimes people go through hard times. And it may be something that somebody's causing on them, or it could just be maybe a circumstance in life. But it's almost like the light gets brighter when you see somebody praise God in difficult times. Same idea here. When people are bold and they obey God when it's difficult, you look at it and go, okay, they've got something that's real. And that's that gravity or that credibility that we're talking about. So anyone can be faithful when it's easy, but boldness reveals conviction. It shows what you really believe, and it gives credibility behind it. So a witness will gain weight when people see that you can't be bought, that you're not going to be intimidated, or you're not going to be silenced about the truth. And so again, those of you that are teaching the teenagers, I know that we've got the adults and the teenagers. There's a great opportunity to explain to somebody how, anytime someone stands for Christ, it's easy to do when people are in agreement, right? You get into, think about going to like summer camp for the teens. It's easier for people to do right at teen camp when everybody's kind of promoting that mentality together. But you get out into the public schools, you get out into maybe a home life where there's not a saved parent, or you get into a situation where you get into the school setting and it's antagonistic. That's where boldness needs to reveal what you really believe. And so again, that for the adults, that's in the workplace, that's in maybe lost family members and mixing in with people out in the community. Learn to be bold. It gives credibility to our witness. The third characteristic is this: the weight of a witness is seen in truthfulness. So he says, our exhortation was not of deceit, nor of uncleanness, nor in guile. So he goes through all these things. He says, this is not what our ministry was about. It was not about deceit. There's no false teaching, no intentional error. Again, we make mistakes. I'm not saying that anybody in your class, you as a teacher, me as a leader, we're going to be perfect. No, but there's no intentional error. There's no manipulation of the truth. Then he goes into the uncleanness. His motives were pure. Paul was checking his heart. As we teach, we want to keep our motives pure. We want to teach in a way that helps people, just like Paul was unto them. You can put yourself as the teacher in that role. You're coming to your class and saying, I'm trying to help you here. It's not so I can get gain from you. I want to help you. And so there was no uncleanness in it. He wasn't using the ministry for selfish or sinful purposes. The next is this: not in guile. There was no trickery. All right, he wasn't there trying to, deceive them or trick them into doing what he wanted them to do. There's no hidden agenda. He wasn't deceptive in his motives. So, unfortunately, in the world today, people expect to find hypocrisy with Christians. That's why integrity is so important for us, and the need to have truthfulness in our ministry is because people are expecting, okay, what's the catch? What's really going on? And so Paul describes the same commitment in his ministry in 2 Corinthians. He says, but we have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully. Paul knew that he had to have, as the messenger, a testimony that matched what the message was saying. So there may be people that reject our message. There may be people that just don't like what it is that we speak when it comes to the truth of the word of God. But they should never question our honesty and our integrity. And that comes into with that credibility of being filled with truthfulness. All right, so truth gains credibility when it is delivered by truthful people. So again, even if somebody that's not honest tells the truth, it doesn't change the message, but it gives so much more credibility when it's an honest person telling the truth. All right, number 4 would be this: the weight of a witness is seen in stewardship. This ties in a little bit with the idea of being faithful. All right, but notice this: when we, in verse number 4, but as we are allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak not as pleasing men, but God which trieth our hearts. So Paul viewed the gospel as a sacred trust. He had been entrusted a stewardship. And so he knew, well, this still belongs to God. And that's how it works with a steward. You're entrusted with someone else's goods or someone else's things, and you have that responsibility. So Paul is facing that, and he writes about it in 1 Corinthians 4. He says, moreover, in stewards, moreover is it required in stewards that a man be found faithful. So we already saw that Paul's faithfulness, and also you see that in his fruitfulness and him being truthful, all of it ties together. But here's the idea. He knew he was accountable. He recognized that God had given us tasks as stewards. And that's why he says, hey, I'm doing this not as pleasing men, but God. So Paul was more concerned about God's approval as compared to, say, public opinion. So when he's got cities that are totally against him, and there's uproars and people that are totally against what he's doing, he knows, yeah, but this is what God wants me to do. This is exactly what God has called me to do. And so that's why it's so powerful for us to understand that we have a stewardship as believers. We need to learn to lovingly tell people the truth. It's not okay for us to just get quiet about the truth. It doesn't mean that we need to be abrasive, all right, and in people's face per se, but we definitely need to be, and here's the term, active in speaking the truth. So the question is not, well, what do people want to hear? That's not what we're trying to figure out. We want to say, okay, God, what have you entrusted us to say? There's that stewardship, and it gives credibility when you say, hey, I'm the messenger, and I'm not saying this because I think you need it. I'm saying it because God told me I need to give it to you. And that's how he handled the gospel. And obviously we know people need it, but the weight and the credibility comes from us recognizing there's a stewardship. Number 5, the weight of a witness is seen in selflessness. All right, so he says, neither at any time use we flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness. So there's two major temptations that will destroy your credibility, my credibility. And here's what they are. Paul deals with both of them right here in this verse. Flattering words. All right, flattery says what people want to hear while you're then trying to gain maybe influence from them, or you're getting them to like you or to do something you want. So you tell them, vain, empty words of flattery. Paul's like, I'm not manipulating people with compliments. I'm not saying things that aren't true. If I'm speaking something, it's because it is true, because it's going to edify and build you up, not flattery, so that I can then gain from it. And the other is the idea of a cloak of covetousness. Now, you may not always think of a cloak the same way, but a cloak hides what lies underneath. Somebody would wear a cloak to then hide what is, underneath that cloak. And so Paul says greed was never hiding behind his ministry. There's times where he needed help. People needed to support him, but he wasn't constantly trying to get from people even when he needed whatever help. All right. He was not serving for personal gain. And the same idea. So Peter deals with this, and he talks about feeding the flock of God. He says, don't do it for filthy lucre. Be of a ready mind. And so we're supposed to feed the flock of God, not feed on the flock of God. And so true ministry is really there to seek to help people, not to use people. All right. So by way of application, again, here's that credibility. It gets established when we seek to be a blessing to people and we don't have that expectation of that blessing being reciprocated. Christianity is not about, okay, I'll scratch your back so you can scratch my back. It's very much about, okay, what has God entrusted me to do? What does God want me to do? And therefore, I'm going to step out. And it's not going to be about me. I want to have a selflessness and a sacrificial mindset. And the final one is this: the weight of a witness is seen in humility. All right. So he talks about we weren't seeking people's glory of others. He said, it might have been burdensome, but, as the apostles of Christ, he's like, I could have thrown my weight around in essence. All right. As the apostle Paul, he could have said, hey, I've got authority over you. Or, hey, I'm important. I'm demanding you to recognize me. But instead of pushing on his privileges and taking advantage of people or taking advantage of his position, he chose to go the route of humility. And it gave great credibility. All right, so he said we weren't seeking glory of men. Paul wasn't looking to get applause from everybody. Hey, did you see what I did? No, he was serving Christ. He was all about it. He was pouring his life into it. And this same attitude, by the way, comes out in his other epistles. I give you Galatians 1 in the notes. It says, for if I yet please men, I should not be the servant of Christ. So he's not saying that people were never happy with what he did. His point was his motivation was ultimately to please the Lord. It wasn't to go out there and get everybody happy about what he was doing. Nothing weakens a testimony faster than self-promotion. People are drawn to people who go, this is about Christ. I'm not trying to build a name for myself. I want Christ to be lifted up. So people that are selfless, you know what? They say, okay, how can I help? And not, I'm sorry, I messed it up. Selfless people ask this, how can I help? Selfish people say, what do I get? And so one of the greatest enemies of a spiritual influence is the desire to be noticed. To think that, okay, I've got to get other people to see what it is that I am doing. And again, these tie in together, the idea of selflessness and then humility. But here's what it is: not boasting, not trying to get it to be where it's all about you. And so a witness gains weight when he's more concerned about God's approval than just getting man's attention. So it's not about, okay, do people see me? It's about this. Hey, do people see Christ through me? So by way of conclusion, here's what you've got in the lesson. Paul's defense of his ministry is ultimately a defense of his character. He was saying, this is the messenger that came to speak the message to you. And he deals with the fruitfulness, the boldness, the truthfulness, the stewardship, the selflessness, and the humility. All of those, you know what they do? They add credibility to his message. So a witness whose life is marked by these characteristics greatly has gravity or credibility to the gospel that we share, the message that we preach. So the message of Christ is totally worth messengers, us, who actually carry the weight and live lives that back up what it is that we are preaching. So again, take this, give this to your class, And again, let's make sure that we're living it on our end. But it's pretty awesome. We as the messengers need to carry weight as you teach these things. Lord willing, you're living that example where people look at it and go, yeah, that's what my teacher's doing. And so we want to put it into practice, but also challenge to have these different characteristics in our life so that our message carries weight. Nothing wrong with the message. God gave us a perfect word, but we've got the opportunity to carry that as a steward. We want to make sure that we're credible. Thanks so much. Keep teaching and keep going forward. God bless.